Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Moss, and in this video series, I'll be conducting interviews with observability experts at KubeCon 2024. In this video, I'll interview Morgan McLean. And before we dive into the full interview, I want to give you a high-level summary of some of the key insights I gained from it. Morgan is a senior director of product management at Splunk, and he's also the co-founder of the OpenTelemetry project. He's also active on OpenTelemetry's governance committee. At the beginning of the interview, we first talked about active OpenTelemetry projects that he and the community are working on. The OpenTelemetry community is currently working on stabilizing semantic conventions and mobile client instrumentation, among other things. A semantic convention defines a standardized naming and structure for data, and within the context of observability, we're talking about telemetry data. We need semantic conventions because different applications and libraries might emit telemetry data in varying formats. And it's important that metrics, traces, and logs follow the same standard so that the telemetry data is universally understandable. And Morgan is working primarily on expanding OpenTelemetry's scope to include areas like profiling and mainframe support. Profiling was a dominant theme throughout the interview, and not only in the interview, but also across observability sessions at KubeCon. From talking with Morgan, I learned that profiling is underutilized in industry, but it's incredibly powerful for debugging at scale, especially for cost optimization and performance enhancements. Continuous profiling enables developers to identify inefficient code at scale that's hard or maybe even impossible to reproduce in non-production environments. There might be parts of your code that perform as expected in testing, but you're not able to truly understand the performance of that code until thousands or millions of users are using your service in production. We also talked about challenges implementing profiling in an organization. One of those challenges is that organizations are less familiar with profiling than they are with other observability signals like metrics, traces, and logs. The other challenge is that current profiling tools often don't correlate profiling signals with metrics, traces, and logs. But with the integration of a new profiling signal in OpenTelemetry, it'll enable organizations to more easily correlate observability signals with profiling data. Here are some other key insights from the interview. Observability tooling is critical to understand service topologies and how data flows through a distributed system. OpenTelemetry's APIs and community-driven integrations allow it to be vendor-agnostic and give you ownership over your data. And the challenges that an organization will face when implementing observability will depend on how mature their tools and processes are. They'll need to adapt their operational and development practices to fully leverage observability. Enhancements like file-based configurations and integration of op-amp will make the deployment and management of OpenTelemetry more efficient. We also talked about emerging trends in observability. There is increasing investment and trust in OpenTelemetry from organizations, and it's becoming the foundation of their observability framework. And through the addition of profiling as the fourth core observability signal, OpenTelemetry is revolutionizing observability. It's allowing organizations to shift from reactive to proactive monitoring. Now that we've completed a high-level summary, stay tuned to watch the full interview. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome to KubeCon 2024. I'm here with Morgan McLean.
Yeah.
Morgan, thank you for joining me.
Of course.
Can you please take a moment to introduce yourself and your role?
Certainly. Yeah. So my name is Morgan McLean. I'm a Senior Director of Product Management at Splunk. I'm also one of the co-founders of the OpenTelemetry project, and I'm on the governance committee and involved in a whole bunch of projects on it. And we're here at KubeCon talking about OpenTelemetry and showing its people, and we've got our great OpenTelemetry Observatory booth to do so, and there's been plenty of great community talks all conference.
Yeah, and OpenTelemetry has been a pretty big theme.
Yes.
I'll have some more questions about that later on.
True for a few years now, yeah.
What kind of, I mean, you've already alluded to this, but what kind of projects and topics are you currently focused on?
Yeah, so as the community, OpenTelemetry is focused on a number of large projects. We went over these in the governance committee presentation yesterday. The biggest ones are likely the OpenTelemetry semantic convention, stabilizing those for different areas so that the metrics or traces and attributes and everything that you get from different types of systems are all consistent with each other, so you can analyze them. That one's large and long running, and it brings a lot of value to the community. There's also sort of specific areas where we're investing in OpenTelemetry, where we're trying to like broaden the project's scope or attempting to increase its capabilities. So those include client instrumentation for like Android, iOS, and web. Those include profiling. Those include support for mainframes and probably various others that just aren't top of mind right now. I'm involved in the profiling and mainframe efforts, but we have, I think it's like 1,200 or 1,300 developers every month checking in code and working across all those projects and more.
Wow, that's awesome. And I've been hearing in so many sessions for observability, profiling has been coming up consistently,
Yes.
And people have been talking about,
Yeah.
can we have like a profiling signal in
Yeah.
OpenTelemetry?
Yeah, and we've wanted it for a while. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago at KubeCon in Valencia was the first time we were discussing profiling in the signal. And if you're watching this, if you're unaware, like when OpenTelemetry was announced in 2019, it was focused on traces, and then we added metrics support several years ago. We added log support last year. And so profiling will be the fourth sort of core signal for OpenTelemetry. And it's one that's probably less well known than the other signals and less well used. Like most developers and ops people and others know what metrics and traces and logs are, and there are many tools. Splunk is one of them, but there's many, many other tools that can go analyze those at scale and get great results from it. Profiling is definitely a bit more niche. Like I have a long history working in production profiling products, but it's something that is used by a couple big firms, but it's not as widely adopted. We're hoping, and we're really excited, that once this comes into OpenTelemetry and it can be correlated with the other types of data, profiling will really take off and it'll be standing at the same sort of level of knowledge and level of usefulness and level of usage as metrics, traces, and logs.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool for debugging code. I mean, you never know at scale, and I think you mentioned this during your talk, but like when your applications scale to millions, thousands or millions of users, some code can end up...
You can't performance test it, right? Like development time profiling has been a thing since forever, since there was code, right? Like that's nothing new. And I worked for a stint in the games industry as a developer. Like I've done my share of client application performance profiling. And when you're doing it for a client application, you can really easily replicate the same performance scenarios that your customers have. Gaming's probably the most extreme example of that, but you fire it up with your debugger, your IDE attached, and you can profile it, and that is pretty straightforward. But when you have something that's running on thousands or hundreds of thousands of nodes with real-world usage, and at most you can typically just run 1 or 2 service instances on your machine, it becomes almost impossible to do the performance testing in production. Or rather, you can do non-production performance testing with like load testing, things like that. But to actually go and look at the code and see what's going on without a production profiling tool or continuous profiling tool, that's effectively impossible. And like most developers have never used one before. These are relatively new. Like when I was at Google before I was at Splunk, I launched what I think is the world's first like continuous profiler that was available to the public. It was a big team, not just me, but that was the first one that people could use outside of Google or Microsoft or some of these big firms that have built them in-house, and they're very powerful there. But I'm hoping that those things have been somewhat niche still the last few years since they've launched. Like Splunk has support for one, and there's some startups here that have done talks with really cool performance profilers, but like none of them are as popular or well known as traces, metrics, logs, sort of general observability tools. And so, like I mentioned before, we're really hoping that this really sort of brings us to the mainstream so that people can actually, look at their code in production and say, oh, golly, like this function I wrote here is using a lot more compute memory than it should be. It's costing us a lot of money or is making the application slow. And I've seen so many examples, having worked on these tools in the past, where that's happened, where you write like a regular expression or something that is supposed to run like once every 5 minutes and not really be important, and it's just eating your CPU to like an unbelievable degree. And you'd have no way of knowing. So I don't know, I'm pretty enthusiastic about this. I'm pumped. And I know I've been talking about it a lot, but like there's a ton of people in the OTel community working on it. Like I'm not sitting there cranking away at code like everyone else is. Like there's a ton of people doing great work to make this happen. And I think we all have similar enthusiasm about this. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. And I mean, do you think the adoption of profiling, is the adoption and why it's taking time, it's kind of like niche.
Yeah.
Is it more of like just awareness, or is it people are aware but they don't fully understand, they're not educated about it?
I think there's a whole bunch of factors. So like the really big hyperscaler firms, at least Google and I think at Meta and probably Microsoft and a few others, like they're doing this because in my experience, when you start using a distributed profiler, you will find some low-hanging fruit where you have these instant large savings for compute, and that's great for anyone. But at the big firms, you will also get sort of the residual, like annually people will sort of improve the performance of their application or optimize it by like 1 to 3% or something. And at those firms, 1 to 3% is substantial. Like that is like millions, tens of millions of dollars, a year or more. And so that's huge. At a smaller organization, the low-hanging fruit is sort of the thing you're most interested in. And I say this just to give some context, like most of these profiling products are not, or solutions inside of these firms are not amazingly well integrated with the rest of their observability stack. They're really being used for cost reduction, for optimizing code so it runs more efficiently. And that's probably true of even some of the solutions on the market today. And so that skews it already towards like the bigger companies. And so that's probably one of the reasons it's somewhat niche. It's also relatively new. There are solutions for it out there, but they haven't been out there for like 10 plus years, like so many other types of things. Those are just some of the reasons why I think it's been niche. The other big one, and I was touching on this before, is that most profiling solutions on the market don't integrate that well with the other insights they're gathering from your metrics and traces and logs. Like you'll be using sort of the main part of an observability solution to respond to outages or detect outages and understand the topology of your application, and you dive into the profiler for cost savings. And I'm exaggerating a bit, like there's probably going to be someone watching that is like, no, I use this one and it's different. And they might be right, but like in many instances, my observation is that they're usually very focused on cost savings. Part of the benefit of this coming into OTel, there's numerous benefits, but maybe one of the biggest is that those profiles will be correlatable with your metrics and traces and logs and other types of data, so that there may be new types of insights or new types of analytics or new types of visualizations you can do in an observability tool now that has these nicely correlated profiles that weren't possible previously. And so now when I'm speculating now, but now when you're like looking at an application topology map and click into an application, maybe maybe some more data is shown. Like there's more possibilities because those linkages will be much stronger.
Yeah, having a correlation between traces and profile, like I can see that being incredibly powerful for root cause analysis and troubleshooting.
Yeah, and there might be also more ways to trigger it. Like distributed profiling has generally, as I mentioned, been used mostly for cost savings. And so it's typically run sort of periodically and it fires up for a couple instances or captures a couple samples in a service over the course of like a minute or something, then shuts down and then hops to another instance. And you do that because there's basically no performance penalty of doing so, and you can statistically analyze these over time. And that's very, very powerful. It's great. There might be other opportunities where maybe you actually fire it up on demand because a span is being sampled on the system, and you roll a dice, and the sampling logic for the profiler also tells it to turn on. And now maybe you can look at like what actually happened inside that span. Like there's more possibilities with these profilers that we haven't seen a whole bunch of examples of previously that may become possible once this is integrated into OpenTelemetry.
Wow, awesome. Yeah.
I say this as like speculation. Somebody's worked on this. Like this is not leaning into like the plans of Splunk or anything. Like it's just there's a lot of interesting possibilities that may come to fruition as a result.
For sure. Thanks a lot for all of that info. I think you answered some of my other questions, so I'm going to have to take a moment to
hopefully
kind of
I
jump
wasn't
ahead.
prattling on too much.
No, it's totally fine. I think that was really great. It was super informative. I think, are there any like specific presentations or projects here at the conference that you've seen that you think have the potential to drive interesting changes in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking about profiling, so I don't want to push on that too much, but there have been some great talks about profiling both at the Observability Day. I think some of the folks from Elastic who've been working on donating on the OTel profiler have had I wasn't able to attend, but I understand they're talking at KubeCon. I imagine that talk's going to be pretty good. But that's like certainly where my head is at for like the sort of really interesting things that I care very deeply about within the community. But more broadly, no, there's been a lot of great sessions. My bias is towards OpenTelemetry, but I've seen great sessions on all the configuration work that's going on, like file-based config for OpenTelemetry. That'll make it much more manageable and changeable at scale. I believe there's a session on OpAmp that's happening. That's the OpenTelemetry protocol, the agent management protocol for actually controlling and configuring agents. There's a lot of really neat things happening. If I had one main takeaway, it's just like OpenTelemetry is everywhere. There's tons of talks by end users and examples of end users using it very successfully. It's everywhere across the market. And that the OpenTelemetry, like everyone is really doubling down on its breadth, which to me means it's a very successful project, right? Like people are not going to be adding profiling or complex agent management scenarios or other things to OpenTelemetry unless they're already getting a ton of value from it, and they are.
Right.
So that's, I know it sounds boring probably, but that's my biggest takeaway.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the answer. Kind of moving towards like observability and implementing observability in organizations, what do you think are some of the biggest, or what are the biggest challenges that you've seen and encountered when implementing observability in a complex environment?
Yeah, it really, this probably won't be satisfying, but it really depends, right? Like I see organizations where they're able to roll things out relatively quickly, like observability today from any vendor, not just Splunk and not just anything using OpenTelemetry, you need agents on each host in order to actually extract the right information. And so there are some organizations where deploying and configuring agents on every host is a relatively trivial thing, right? They're using Ansible, or they're all on Kubernetes, and they're using Helm, and like that's just a sort of snap your fingers thing that someone can do and they can roll that out. And so for an organization like that, the challenges are sort of much further along the journey where they actually get everything working quite quickly. And now they need to change how they operate as a team in a business, right? Like the most obvious things are they need to change how they do, they can consider changing how they're doing alerting and responding to those alerts and on-call and everything else. And over time, I think the successful organizations incorporate the knowledge and insights and analytics they glean from observability tools into their development cycle, right? So like, to me, an example of like really properly benefiting from a good observability posture is you've got, I don't know, a bunch of services running and you task one or more engineers with adding some new feature to your application that's running on all these services. And the first thing they do is jump into like the service topology map and understand how things work today. And they can go and see like, I'm working on an e-commerce system and I've been told to add a currency selection system, something like that. And they can look at the topology map, they can look at flows of exactly what happens when sort of similar scenarios are being done today, and very quickly start architecting how they want to build this next, right? Without an observability tool, that's very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And this is a very different scenario than what we usually talk about when we're pitching observability tools to people or discussing, right? But that means you've already gone through, like, you're getting so much value already for like your on-call, your ops posture and everything else, that you're actually integrating all of these insights into how you're going to develop software. It speeds up your development velocity considerably. That's like the best case, right? Worst case is, golly, I have to deploy a bunch of agents and that's challenging. And OpenTelemetry is doing a lot of work to make that easier. At Splunk, we're doing a huge amount of work to make that easier, and we've been very successful at that over the last year. But like, there's sort of this continuum of are your challenges in setting it up, or your challenges in adopting your practices and posture to it, or is your biggest sort of challenges that you're getting so much value from this that your challenge is integrating this into areas, into things where you're not even being reactive, and like your challenge is actually trying to become more proactive as a result.
Right. I think that use case that you brought up was really interesting about the service map and being able to view the service map, because when I think about when I've worked on technical things, right? Initially, when you set up or you write like some application, right, you create some great UML diagrams and some architecture, and then the application changes over time, and those documents are completely useless. And so if you have an observability solution implemented, you can just look at the service map and see the current state.
This is very personal to me. Like my first full-time job in this industry was working on a huge e-commerce system at Microsoft. I learned a ton. It was quite exciting. But one of the challenges there was, we're developing things very quickly. We had this huge, broad organization trying to overhaul how we did e-commerce. We're, I think, very successful in the end. But one of the challenges was that there was like a handful of people, including myself, but various others, where we'd be spending like a non-trivial amount of our time every day drawing on a whiteboard the current state of the world, or like the state of the world with that, what would be the state of the world once all the current things that are in flight are developed and shipped, right? Sort of the current and projected state of the world. And that changes because every week, every month, we're sort of breakneck development. Architectural decisions get made, some team or person tries to build something, they go, oh shoot, this isn't going to work, we're going to have to change how this functions. And in a large enough organization, there's only a few people who can keep pace with knowing how all that works. And in a large enough org, like this is just the e-commerce stack, like I would challenge you that at like Google or Meta or Microsoft or anything, like there's no one who knows how even like anything outside of their org like sort of functions in the big broader picture. Like it's impossible. And even if they did, they'd be spending 100% of their time doing that, and their entire job would just be drawing it out for people. Like this is not a good use of time, and it doesn't scale.
Yeah.
And so having a system that can actually show you like, this is how it works right now, authoritatively, where then you can actually go in and be like, okay, so what if a customer, when a customer does this particular interaction, how does that fan out? It's very, very powerful, right? And that's another, like we're talking about profiling earlier, but that's another like use case that's very personal to me, where like, we don't talk about it that much in the observability business, but informing people how they can better architect their software is something that observability tools have really real potent ability to do.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one we do not discuss as often as we discuss improvements to on-call and SLOs and everything else.
I agree. I haven't heard anyone talk about that particular use case.
Yeah, but it's definitely used. Like we see it with our customers at Splunk Observability, and certainly if you ask people at other observability firms, they'll tell you the same. Like when your tools are really providing value, they actually become this sort of critical part of your sort of architecture and development planning lifecycle.
Like a byproduct of implementing observability.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, because now everyone has the power to stare at that whiteboard, and not even just stare at that whiteboard that has all the boxes drawn on it, but to actually test like when this happens, what occurs. And like I was saying, we always are able to, we talk about that as part of like sales motions, discussions, and everything else in this industry. For when something goes wrong, you can look at this map and use all these tools and find out what's going on. But the case of like, I want to extend this and change it is perhaps equally important.
Absolutely. Thanks for your answers there. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm wondering, what's the importance of OpenTelemetry being vendor agnostic, and what is the biggest value add of OpenTelemetry in an org? Yeah,
there's numerous value adds, so we'll get to that in a minute. But like the power of it being vendor agnostic, there's many ways to cut this, because that also has numerous benefits. Probably the most obvious, the most instant, is that good observability tools, like ones that use profiles, metrics, and spans for traces and everything else, need to sort of connect themselves relatively deep within applications to extract the right information, right? Like if you want to capture spans that you create distributed traces from, well, now you need to actually have some kind of instrumentation that understands, this is an application written in express.js for Node.js, and here's the incoming HTTP handler, and when I'm going to pass another call downstream because I needed to call another service to get data, this is how I correlate these things. Like, it's not trivial. And that's just one example of one web framework and one language. There are thousands, tens of thousands of these things that you need to integrate with. Database clients, web frameworks, remote procedure call systems, and everything else that you want to get this data from, and you need to get it from all of them for this to work in most orgs. The value of OTel is that, whether you buy Splunk or Datadog or Dynatrace or whatever, no one of those vendors usually has a large enough engineering organization where they can go sit all day cranking away at building and maintaining all of those integrations. It's tremendous, right? And so, like, anyone watching this, if they've used any observability tool, prior to OpenTelemetry at least, would have run into the challenge of like, oh, they don't support this whole programming language that I use, right? Oh, they don't support the databases I want to instrument, or like they support my language, but I use like this sort of more niche, set of libraries on it. They don't know what those are, and that happens. And even if they could cover that, it would mean they're spending no time on the actual tool and analytics because it's a massive undertaking. The most immediate value of OpenTelemetry, there's lots of values, but probably the most immediate, the most obvious, the one why all this exists and why it all came together when we started it, is that maintaining and building that's almost impossible, and yet it needs to happen. And so with OpenTelemetry, long term, and we're seeing this materialize now, it provides the APIs that the purveyors of those libraries, of those database clients, of those web frameworks, of those RPC systems can actually just integrate with, because they want people to see what's going on as well within those to debug them, where they can actually integrate with the OTel APIs or the OpenTelemetry protocol for standalone apps and just submit the data. Right now, the only people doing instrumentation are the ones actually maintaining those things. For them, that's not a big lift. That's pretty straightforward. In the intermediate period, OTel has this huge community of developers who actually build and maintain these integrations, right? Because OTel exists, not everyone's going to adopt it day one, or at least not all the purveyors of those frameworks and sort of sources of telemetry. And so in this current period, OpenTelemetry is providing all the glue for that, which is also very, very valuable. So that's the core value. Now, if you're an end user, there's also the ability to quickly switch observability vendors. You're not locked in anymore, the ability to customize your data. There's like numerous other substantial benefits to using OpenTelemetry. But that first one, the fact that it even works, the fact that it just gives you the data you want, is the most immediate, is the reason why all of this is here. Well,
right.
I point over here, this has nothing to do with OTel, but why all the OTel observability stuff is here?
Why a lot of people are here
Correct.
today, really.
Yeah, that's why we're talking.
Exactly, yeah. My final question, do you have any unique or surprising, and we kind of like, I feel like we talked about this a little bit, at least as the byproduct use case, but any unique or surprising observability use cases that you've encountered and you'd like to share?
I mean, it's probably just going back to the using it for development time, just because we don't talk about that much. But like using the analytics that you glean from all this data to better understand what you've built, so you can better enhance it, improve it, change it, or so on. Right? That's true for profiling, which we discussed. Using that data to potentially do major proactive performance improvements. That's true. If you're tapped on the shoulder and told go build feature foo, and you need to re-architect how some things work. That's probably the most. Not unique isn't like not well used, but that's the most, the use case that probably we discussed the least, that's the most potent. In terms of like sort of other unique and surprising use cases, I know that OpenTelemetry is being used on some cars for their like in-car systems to do just like basic like performance tracking and things like that. What else? I don't know, there's so many like interesting places where it's being used. Like I have not worked on this, but I hear about like IoT devices that are using OpenTelemetry. I think another one is I run a bunch of like services at home on like a small Kubernetes cluster. There's one to track and categorize all of our photos. It's called Image. It's kind of like Google Photos but self-hosted. And a couple months ago, they had like an update that I saw the release notes for, and it says like, we've integrated OpenTelemetry to give you like performance metrics about how your like photo processing systems work. Like,
oh, that's cool.
Hey, that was pretty gratifying. I like that. Yeah,
it's really cool. I'm the same way. I have a little home lab set up at home with some Dell Optiplex servers.
Yeah, mine's always just my last PC that's running on. But yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was very gratifying to be like, I'm sitting at home deploying this nice software to categorize our photos, and it's a thing that I've worked on for a long time, and seeing it integrated into that use case, which is not the typical thing you see, because like conferences like this and most of the use cases that we hear about are like big enterprise software companies, things like that. Like, it's pretty neat to see that running at my house, and it's not a thing I had anything to do with. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, and I really appreciate your time today, Morgan.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending some time, and I hope that you have a great rest of the conference.
Yeah, likewise.
And thank you everyone for watching this interview, and I hope you enjoy watching the rest of the sessions. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, we'd love to hear your feedback. And be sure to stay tuned for more videos from my time at KubeCon 2024. I'll be posting daily recap videos, as well as interviews I conducted with industry experts at KubeCon. Thanks for watching.